going?
We'll be up here, so. There you go. Good.
Yeah?
Yep, well, you're live.
I'm
Wouldn't
live.
worry about this camera, I'd worry about the other one.
Okay, so we won't see what we're doing on the Facebook Live?
No, I wouldn't worry about it right now, so.
Okay. Hi guys, my name's Kayleen and I am one of the team leaders with the newly formed Team REV-USA, and I am sitting here today with Joseph, who has kindly agreed to provide some moral support and also help provide some context for some of the things that we're going to be discussing. I've never done anything like this. I am so far outside of my comfort zone right now, so please bear with me. We're here today to make a proposal to our neighbors near and far, especially here in Missoula, Montana. We're going to talk about the different layers of this revolution that I keep reading people are waiting for. And we're here to tell you that this revolution's been going on for decades, and we're just here today to level up and help folks understand the different layers involved in a revolution. There is a political revolution well underway, a lot of different organizations that are working diligently to help make some of the necessary changes, but fact of the matter is we do not have time to wait for politics to catch up. We're in a pickle, and we need to, in my opinion, we need to act now, and through what they call solution-based activism. And there's a lot of people who are confused or who want to help but aren't sure where to start, or even if they might have anything to offer, maybe because they've been deterred from helping in the past, or they've been told, well, you can only help through charitable donations or time. And we're here to say that there's a role in the solutions and in the healing of our world and our society. There's a role for every single one of us from age 3 to 103. And we're going to talk about that. So, and there it stopped. There's a shocker. So we are streaming on multiple mediums today. Our Facebook Live feed has just stopped. An error publishing your live video to news feed. Please check your connection and camera and retry later. Oddly enough, they were working just fine. Okay, so anyway, I've loaded links for the YouTube and the local live broadcast, so I'm hoping that folks will know to switch over to one of those links since the Facebook Live is not working. So, gosh, where was I? I'm sorry.
You were summarizing the agenda. So.
Why are we here today? I'm a mom, and I chose to bring new life into this world, and not just any life, but that of a young girl. And I had the right to choose, and the society I brought her into, they are now limiting her access to birth control and her right to choose, while simultaneously creating an increasingly hostile environment for her. So my goal is to do the work now that needs to happen, so that she doesn't need to learn to fight, and so that she doesn't have to do the work, that she'll be able to take care of the seeds that our generation and those before us have been planting for some time. Now, one of the things that I was hoping to discuss is, we're witnessing a lot of stuff going on in society right now around us, a lot of hatred, and that's why I'm here today. Hate is what's got me here today, and love for my child, and all the vulnerable among us who are relying on us to step up our game right now. And it's time. It is time. We're long overdue. So the problem behind organizing behind people or political leaders or anything like that is that people come and go. People are fallible, are easily coerced, in some cases have their own agendas, things like that. Whereas ideals and dreams, because I share a similar dream with some people that have been being quoted quite a bit, Dr. King, Mahatma Gandhi, some other folks that are among us now, but I am choosing not to use names, and that is part of our power. What's in a name? There is power in a name, and how you use a name or how you choose not to use a name, just like there is power in action and there is power in inaction. At any rate, so we're proposing an umbrella of sorts for our active teammates at all levels that are currently in the fight and those who are hoping to find a place and find a role on the team themselves. We are, Team Rev is actively recruiting members today at all levels. And I guess the proposal, it's an idea, and that's how this is going to work on this team. Is everybody's input is valuable and valid. Everyone's experience, knowledge, skills is valid. And so we'll ask a lot of questions. We have an idea of what direction we'd like to go, but this is a team effort. Teamwork makes the dream work, right? We've all, throughout some point in our lives, have participated in some sort of team activity, team sport, even shut-ins like me have a role to play in this. And so what we're proposing is teams. Say we have Team Red that could work on matters of human rights, human rights justice, things like that. Team Green hopefully would be organizations similar to Greenpeace. I know I said I'm not going to use names, but I am throwing out some Hail Marys today. Team Yellow, Team Blue, Team, and so on and so on. And each group would say we have our water protectors, our earth protectors, our animal rights activists, our human rights activists, and so forth. Each one would fit under a team. And so what we're proposing is consolidation and collaboration on a very large scale, starting locally. That's what we mean when we say grassroots, because I've been doing some activism work around town myself, and have even dabbled a little bit in the political arena, and we're in a pickle, guys. I honestly, I think that we've been placing trust in the wrong hands for far too long. So now we need to trust ourselves and each other more than ever. I honestly question the motives of most people who want to go into politics. I wonder what their motives might be, their agendas. People who are going into it out of a sense of necessity, they feel like they're being called to it, things like that. People that are being groomed to go into politics. There are some running locally that have been, I believe, from what I understand, groomed. And that's why we have such a huge disconnect amongst people who claim to be representing us, who are actually grossly misrepresenting us on so many levels. So we're proposing that we go out within our communities and we find the people who are already in the fight, that may have never even considered going into politics, or have but decided not to, because when you put yourself out here like this, you essentially paint a target on yourself. And with the world of social media being as it is, everyone has a new sense of fearlessness. You know, it's easy to be very cruel and say unkind things behind the security of a computer. And, you know, when people go into service to serve the people, there's a reason we're having trouble getting the ones we need in there, because they're not getting the support that they need from us. You know, I see all the time something happens, and I hear people say, "Oh, geez, somebody should do something about that. Somebody should say something about that." Well, guess what? We are somebody. There is nobody coming to save us. We're it, all of us. That's it. And we need to mobilize, and we need everybody on the move right now. There are a lot of people working right now, locally and abroad, that have amazing potential solutions to what's happening around us. And so what we would like to do is to help find them, educate ourselves and each other, empower ourselves and each other, enable ourselves and each other to do the work that needs to be done, and also to have each other's backs in a way that, in a world that is increasingly treacherous and hostile and divisive and hateful, is an active revolution all by itself. So at any rate, I'm gonna ask Joseph if he has anything he would like to add at this moment in time while I go through some notes. And
Sure.
okay.
Yeah, and thanks for inviting me here today, of course, to share in part of what you're promoting in terms of a message, and also to help illuminate some concepts that seem to get often missed, or there tend to be missteps within the social justice advocacy realm. Things that often get overlooked, say cultural competency being a central factor. Now that's what I represent. That's one of the academias, I guess you could say, that I have pursued, studied, and have examined both as a discourse and as a practical application at the university level, working locally here within the Missoula community and the University of Montana. This is not to say that any of us by this point are experts in the field per se, but in terms of the directive that I was coming from is to inform people at the local level, particularly students in this case, how to navigate and work with and respect Indigenous First Nations communities, and how to cross into those territories and regions where communities are largely located, and do so with a directive that is not bringing prescriptions for problems in those communities. It's a voice that is more willing to ask questions of where can I be effective in being an ally, and then also having the ability to, first of all, see the importance of becoming informed about our Native communities just firsthand. I think that in terms of expressing respect for anyone as you walk through the door, I think it's important to first of all understand where they're coming from, what their language is, how to not misstep within that conversation and so forth. I think we all do it in practice. There are people who are from varying religious practices and belief systems that are constantly interacting, and I know that folks within those communities and groups often take care to make sure that they're not overstepping or assuming incorrectly. So I know that we're capable of this. I've seen many examples of it. Working with international students on campus was part of that function as well. And also very eye-opening too, to some of the challenges that are students abroad coming here to visit and study within the confines of the United States. That they have interactions within this community that there's either shocked by or confronted by, or people within our own local communities that they run into conflict with simply because they represent a culture or a people that are largely outside of the borders of the United States. And where I come from as a Native American individual, Anskapi Pagani Nitsitapi, which essentially for the Blackfeet people essentially only means that we're the people from this place. That's what our name means. So that being said, it's not a racial identity, it's not a skin color identity, it is an identity by place and by community largely. And so historically, Blackfeet people have not looked to each other's blood quantum or I'm so much this native, etc., which has been fleshed out of the contemporary sort of colonialism and this rhetoric that has been applied to rate, classify, identify people separately, and so forth. That's something that we have been assimilated into. It's a practice that we have taken on and now today struggle. If you talk about the blood quantum concept or identity in Blackfeet country even, I'm just speaking from that specifically because that's where the place where I come from. That conversation is hugely divisive. Some people want to identify by it for a myriad of reasons. Many of those being placed upon them, and us, I should say us, and because I'm included in that conversation. But in terms of how it affects a community, if you plug a system of belief into people and try and codify that for well over 100 years or at least several generations, you're going to have some confusion in what the identity was prior to that. And so that's what our communities are experiencing, is a sense of, I don't want to just label it identity crisis, but it is one that has been imported, placed over, and now as indigenous peoples, we're trying to find ourselves through that. I think a living example of that is the Day of Dead festival.
You know, Joseph, sorry to interrupt, but somebody, I recall overhearing a conversation about somebody called you a reverse racist, which, by the way, is not a thing. Racism is racism. There's no such thing as reverse racism. However,
well, yeah, the racism is first of all, it's an invented term. It is a term that has been applied to a practice of recognition.
Kind of like alternative facts.
Well, I mean, we'll put it this way. The concept of race is a codification strata, a structure that was built into place to serve a very specific purpose, and that purpose operating within the bounds of the United States. Now, this gets tossed around a lot. This gets questioned, and no, racism existed and race existed prior to the United States and so forth. And I will say this, difference existed, and people were largely divided again by place, by region, by even by historical context and place and land. But it has not been, and even by name to culture, people have been separated and either marginalized or held up, right? But that's not race.
the isms.
Those are cultural identifiers and separations, all right? And those are nations that are having conflicts among them. Race and racism was invented and codified in the United States. Now, it was sort of inspired by all of that. Let's give it that, all right? So if you look at the early European influence in colonialism crossing over into the United States to operate as a system, right? what you had was both light-skinned or white people. I always put that in quotation marks because it's not my term. So the concept of white was applied to a group of people that were less than indentured slaves. They were slaves, but they were slaves on par with African slaves. And so to keep these two groups from coming together and fighting together and joining forces, basically the poor people coming together to fight tyranny, right? What you had was then that upper strata, that structure, looking down and saying, we need a solution to this problem. And what they did was say, you people aren't slaves. You're white people. You're different. You're better. These folks over here are slaves because they're only relegated through things like invented pseudosciences like phonetics and so forth. Things that they were examining the shapes of skulls and the height of individuals to somehow suggest that their intellect was only capable of so much. Right. All right? And this was the conundrum, right? So therein, we begin to explore the concept of race. We're saying that some people are fully human being and others are lesser than human being. And the reason being is so that we can justify enslavement, we can justify the removal of Native American people from their lands, we can justify the theft of those lands and the continual taking of resources from those individuals. And that codification strata, if you will, places the white European at the top of the list, Caucasian, all right? You can follow this all the way down through the Mongoloid, okay? And through Asians, to Native Americans, to Afrikaners, etc. And they all place below so that this economic structure up top can be protected. It can exist unto itself as its own entity, and that has no obligation to the rest of these people because they're sub-people. They're not exactly human beings, right? So this is the purpose and design of the concept of race. Now there were cultures and difference and all of this identity prior to that, right? I'm not trying to say that didn't happen or there wasn't difference, but only in the United States, only through academia, only through a pseudoscience was promoted this idea that white people were superior to all other subraces. Now that is an established concept that was brought forward to, again, like I said, rob Native American people of their lands and keep slaves from revolting against each other. In fact, he gave non-African slaves a way out.
Some would call the working poor among us indentured servants or slaves of a type, right?
Well, I mean, the minute we're born, we're given a number,
Mm-hmm.
a social security number, and that is immediately we start out being classified based on our income, based on how we operate within an economic system, whether we're successful at that or not. Mm-hmm. And that also tends to inform whether or not we, in the larger public view, are deemed trustworthy or accountable or somehow valid,
right,
if you will. And it's a one-size-fits-all system that not all fit into in terms of understanding and operating.
Actually, real quick, if you guys have time and the ability, I'd like you to search a term called surplus population, if you would, please. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so then in terms of a purpose for what is race, it is the ability for a group, or hierarchy, if you will, to stigmatize, to denigrate, to actively be able to disadvantage a group, and do so with a clear conscience.
So where do you think this comes from? How is it perpetuated here in modern day society, the systemic abuse?
Well, it's never changed. It's always been the same. And I think people confuse race and racism with violent overt acts, because that's the stuff that really lands on our memories as what oppression really is. And those are oppressive acts, mind you. When you string someone up to a tree by the neck and you hang them to death and then you burn their body, that is quite directly saying that their personhood has no meaning, right? So as we move forward from that, that's the extreme result of the thinking of racism. That's an entitlement to say that, you know what, this is a lesser person, I'm going to do this act to them, and next I'm going to get away with it. And not only that, I'm going to parade it around in front of their family and their people, as if I have a right. Now, people think of that as being racism, and that only. And it's largely misunderstood, because what race and racism truly are economic systems, they're governmental systems, they're judicial systems, they're the systems they're the reason why Colin Kaepernick is taking a knee. They're to say that the system itself is what is the problem, and the get on the knee thing is a way to exercise the advantage within those subcultures. They afford them the ability to, first of all, make people uncomfortable. You can clearly see that it's inconveniencing an entitled group of our population being largely what in this country? If you look at the statistics, it is largely identifying as white. Now that's self-identifying. That's not something that I've put on people. That's not something that I've placed over people. And Native American people, let me be clear, did not bring race or racism or that concept or conversation to the table. That was placed over us, all right? So we look at race and racism as an entity, as an existing thing that influences the thinking of people's processes. It informs our ego. It puts us in a place where we can actually say, you know what, you deserve a little less. Or because you are a certain type of, from a population, it's no wonder you're poor. What it does is it removes the examination of what the system is and how it keeps people oppressed, certain populations and groups. We can follow the African slave trade straight through to the steelworking industry, and that was a way of corporate wage slavery, and then that moved right into the prison pipeline population. Now that's all connected, and there's no way that any historian or anyone, I think, even on their best day, can go back and try and disprove, because there's data, there's historical evidence, there's a timeline, and there's also a paper trail. And it connects both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party as sort of this shifting tide, depending on where the country was at that point. You have people today, in today's day and age, saying, oh, but the Democrats way back when, or the Republicans way back when did this or that. It is a, how do you say this, a very fluid entity, this politic of the United States. And in what we can assume to this point, at least in the last 20 to 30 to 40 years, and you can even look back 500 years, is that neither party at any point has ever done any significant or substantive support within Native communities for their own purpose. For the purpose of, say, the Salish or the Kootenai, etc.
Unless it's an election year.
Well, it's always a partnership or what we can get out of it. And much of that is ongoing assimilation tactics, ongoing expectations of you better measure up to this model, otherwise you're not quite good enough human-wise. And we even have people within our own tribal communities thinking that economic stability is a solution for Native American people as opposed to self-identity and what is our culture and who we are as a people. And that really gets missed in the conversation.
Well, I think most of us are too busy just fighting for survival to be able to focus on the things that really matter, like who we are as a whole.
For sure. And
as a species.
Being kept divisive The tactic being divisive and people being kept divided is
Labels, gotta love those labels.
is what allows us, as in those in economic strife, to look at the group next door and saying they're the person taking. So I think it leads us into this conversation that, you know, within this outreach, to get more people to be outdoors, involved, calling people out. People call it this culture of calling out, as if that's a bad thing. And I think
There's a lot of people being vilified for being truthful and honest, trying to do the right thing.
Right, and I think I've even heard somebody, I think it was Al Franken or something, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, but sort of phrase it in a way that it was like constructive criticism or constructive calling out culture, as opposed to being, you know, too honest. And that in and of itself is still problematic. And just from a community, a local community of Missoula, which is a beautiful community, it's a nice area, it has tremendous potential, but even in culturally, academically, it is socked into its own entitlements.
Speaking of entitlements, we've all heard the term privilege and white privilege being thrown around quite a bit, to the point where I think there's a lot of miscommunication, misunderstanding as to what we mean by that.
Right.
I grew up believing that America was the great melting pot, that, you know, I was colorblind. You've heard that, right? I didn't realize how truly privileged I was until recent events over the past couple of years, and I'm still learning. I stumbling over my words here. I am what you would call economically challenged, you know, but I still have privilege. I'm a woman, which may not be, depending on who you talk to, may not be the best thing, especially in a society where there are people among us using the Handmaid's Tale as an instruction manual as opposed to the cautionary tale it's probably meant to be. Sorry, I'm a mom. I get a little worked up about things like that. But we have privilege even when we don't think we have privilege. And we have in my opinion, a responsibility to use that however, whenever, wherever we can, wherever we witness or experience some form of injustice. I don't know how many videos I've watched online of some person who's been emboldened and empowered by the contradictions happening in DC. They're going off on some innocent foreign person or Hispanic. One of the worst ones that I've seen recently was this man going off on this Hispanic couple. And I think because you learn, you see a certain amount of hatred, right? I think what I found most shocking in most of these videos are the people standing around saying and doing nothing in the background. Like they're thinking, gee, somebody should say something about that. Somebody should stop that. Well, they are somebody's. So that's privilege. You know, you're not the one being targeted, but you're witnessing someone else being targeted. Do the right thing. You know, even if it's uncomfortable, because I don't know about you, I'm not willing to look my little girl in the eyes one day and tell her that the changes needed, that the work that needed to be done was too hard, too scary, too uncomfortable. I was too busy. I was too tired. I was too poor to get my butt out here when I have a severe form of PTSD that comes with a fairly healthy dose of anxiety, social anxiety. There are times when leaving my house, for me, is an act of courage. And I'm not expecting a pat on the back for that. And I'm not expecting sympathy for it. In fact, I do not want any. My point is that I chose to bring new life into this world. when I made that choice, I also made her a promise, because I knew that this world that I was about to bring her into was becoming increasingly treacherous and dangerous. So I made her a promise that I was going to do everything in my power to fight for what's right so that she won't have to. And I'm not willing to tell her that she didn't mean enough to me for me to step outside of my own comfort zone and try. And I'm banking on the mama bears out there and the papa bears and the wannabe mama bears and papa bears who are maybe questioning whether or not they should bring new life into this world right now, because we have so much work to do. And I understand that feeling of loss of hope. I know I told you guys that I wasn't going to throw numbers in here, but there are some numbers that just keep popping in my head. A couple being during the presidential elections, about 47% of eligible voters didn't vote. But when it comes to the issues, what was it, 72 to 77% of you showed up at the polls. So, I mean, I know that what that speaks to me, what that's telling me. It's telling me, A, that we don't have good enough choices at the polls, that we need to open the primaries because two parties are not giving us appropriate options at this point, in my opinion. Anyway, I don't want to go into that side of things because Team Rev, there are going to be some political aspects to it, but this is about the other necessary work that we need to do, because we can't keep asking. It's not fair for us to expect other people to keep doing the work when some of us can't even find the time to show up to their events, to provide the support that they need to be able to do the work that we're asking them to do, to make sure that they're getting the resources that they need to do the work that needs to happen. There are people who are working themselves to the bone to try to present solutions, and we're meeting opposition in places we should not be meeting opposition at all. We've trusted people to keep our food, our water, our air safe, and we're being systematically poisoned. Our foods there's some chemicals called glyphosates in those that are finding their way into almost all our foods. A lot of people don't know that much of American wheat is processed at the time of harvesting. It's doused with a chemical called Roundup. That has been proven to not only decimate bee populations, which are now either extinct or on the endangered species list, but it's also been proven to alter our DNA and make us sick. I can share some personal experiences with you of me trying to provide for my child and to make sure that she stays healthy while also receiving educational opportunities. And I was put in a position where I had to consider pulling her from one of the only educational opportunities afforded to people who are economically challenged in our area, because I wasn't willing to play Russian roulette with her health. I knew through doing, we're our children's first doctors, their first nurses. And so I did what they call an omission diet. And, there's people talking about gluten allergies, celiac disease, things like that. And now there's, confusion. Well, maybe it's not the gluten we're allergic to. Maybe it's the additives and the pesticides that are in our foods. And I do want to give a shout out to March Against Monsanto. I run one of the Missoula, March Against Monsanto Missoula pages. I'm going to encourage people to do their own research and homework, because that's how I got here today, because I was every bit as in the dark as most of my neighbors are until I became pregnant with my child. I had become just as frustrated, just as in many ways hopeless. And then I started research when I became pregnant after being told I would never have any children at the age of almost 40. I began researching what I put in my body because you're eating for two at that point, and that's when I learned about Monsanto and that movement and food safety, and hopefully they'll hop on one of our teams. And the reason we're sending shout outs to different organizations like this is to make it easier for those among you and among us that want to get out and do the work. If you're passionate about something, if you feel called for something, but you're not sure how to go about finding your place, we want to make it easy for you to get involved in your own destiny and taking control of it. And that's what we're going to be discussing in future events. I had some folks ask if we were going to be doing anything like this in public. The thing about that is in organizing and speaking with a lot of other organizers, again, it's the empty seats. I go to important functions around town where you would expect the house to be full, and there's nothing but empty seats. My child's program that she was in is in. There's, I believe, 300 families, and at two very important meetings, at one there was 4 other parents there out of 300. I think for the fun one, for the activities, I think we had almost a dozen out of 300 show up for that. So if we can't commit to making sure our children are getting everything we need, we're supposed to, as parents, we're supposed to want better for our children than what we have. The old, it was good enough for me. Great, it was good enough for you, wonderful, but we're still supposed to want and demand better for our children, from ourselves, for them, in my opinion. And I think that people are just not sure. When you think revolution, you think guns, you think violence. No, we're proposing something where first of all, we do not advocate violence of any kind, and make that very clear. But we are advocating being a gigantic pain in the neck for anyone who is benefiting from the suffering of others, anyone who has a vested interest in keeping us divided. We'll discuss things such as civil disobedience versus social disobedience. Civic duty, civic duty is more than just jury duty, and we have a duty. There are children in foster care that when they, and in the group homes here in town, when they became wards of the state, like it or not, they became our responsibility. And over the summer, I reached out to one of the local youth homes here in town, and just to find out if there was anything they wanted or needed. And when I got a copy of their wish list, there were basic needs on this wish list. So we're not, I know people like to think that we're on it, we've got it covered. We don't. We really don't. We can do better. And I have high expectations of myself, but have been learning to keep my hopes higher than my expectations. I've done things like this in the past that, at one point we had one gentleman from Germany who was tuning in to offer information on horticulture and how you can actually power your entire house with houseplants. But, there are a lot of potential solutions out there. And I frankly, when it does come to lobbyists and what's going on in DC, if it was up to me, besides having labels on them all like NASCAR drivers as far as who they're really working for, because by the way, we are their rightful employers. Anyway, so if it was up to me, as far as lobbyists go, since we're having so much trouble getting the dark money and the corruption out, I don't know, I would slap body cams on every single one of those guys. I would post veterans at their doors, and the only lobbyists getting in are the ones proposing solutions. especially when it comes to the corporate ones that much of the mess and the pickle that we're in, I think they would go to the bottom of the list if it was up to me, and the people among us that are offering real solutions to the problems would join us. And part of this revolution is, they said the revolution's not going to be televised, right? Well, I know we're just MCAT, right, and just a little local thing. But part of this proposal is that we give them nothing but a revolution to televise. Meaning, everything we do, and we're going to have fun doing this, everything we do is with purpose and with wisdom, but also committed to giving the corporations some complications and addressing the contradictions, and coming at it from a place of healing, because that, I believe, when we're talking about grassroots, I think healing is where we should focus. Love for ourselves and our fellow humans, love for this planet that provides us everything we could ever possibly need, but we are simultaneously decimating much of what we need from her. The animals that don't have voices, while we're sitting here discussing things, I think here in America, even people like myself, I live below poverty level right now, because I also live with a disability. And I am working on bettering my family circumstances, but we still have a responsibility to speak out, and we still have something to offer. We have our voices. They haven't taken that away from us yet. They are trying to take away our rights to peacefully assemble. They are just chipping away at our constitutional rights. So it's amazing how many people aren't alarmed by what's happening, because we have become so desensitized. I think we discussed that earlier. So we have a lot of work to do. There's a lot of people already working on solutions that would absolutely participate in group discussions and help with this vision that we do share with others, and this dream that we share with many of a sustainable, healthy, safe, productive future where we're not already 6 months into next year's resources, which, by the way, we are. Everything we do from the time we get out of bed in the morning right now is unsustainable. So you would think something like that would be a ticker on the nightly news until we got caught back up to where we should be, right? But it's not. So we're advocating, be careful who you trust for your knowledge and your wisdom. Don't trust anyone who's bringing it to you. Seek it out yourself, or be willing to find some people who you do trust, who do a lot of research themselves, and maybe pick their brains. Cognitive dissonance, that is something I also would ask you to search. Cognitive dissonance is basically, how do I summarize it best? It's where we've been taught to think and believe a certain way. So when our belief systems and what we've learned are challenged, even with proof and evidence, for many of us, it's still very difficult to wrap our heads around it. What this project is hoping to do is to help start connecting dots for folks who are just beginning the process, and then also to elevate those who are already doing the work. I do have more information. We do have more information that we want to share with you, but we are running short on time. So actually, wow, I think we need to go ahead and wrap it up here pretty quick. Did you have anything that you wanted to add?
All I'm going to say is, if you're not interested in your local tribal communities, that's a problem. Because these are people that have existed in these lands for tens of thousands of years, that have place here, story, history, etc., and purpose. And just because people are impoverished or poor or struggling or have been oppressed, People have tried to change them into something that they're not, and they're not willing to do that, does not make them bad people. It doesn't make them lesser people or incapable people. It simply means that they're trying to be more self-possessed within their own context as opposed to something that's being layered over them. So a modicum of respect for our Indigenous communities would be even a start, but next would be taking it upon ourselves, or individuals who are non-native, learning about communities, going to sources and professors, actually maybe even paying for this information to say that it's worth it. Because people like myself are out here in the community willing to do the education, if you're willing to compensate us. So there it is.
Yeah. But we're not going to, and it's not fair for us to ask others to do this work and then show up and speak to a room full of empty chairs. We're all in this together, like it or not. Whatever your political beliefs are, whatever your religious beliefs are, we're all on this planet together, and we're all in the same pickle, and we are in a pickle. But we don't have to stay there. So if you are interested in learning more about this vision that is a work in process, just like we all are, you can email us at teamrev@protonmail.com or message us on Facebook at Team REV-USA. You know, we're proposing something unique and unorthodox. We're proposing a revolution where hopefully not a single shot is ever fired.
Get out, get active.
Get out here with us. We need you. Your children need you. We all need you. We need each other. We're all we have.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, and Scott, whenever you're ready. Thanks, guys. Brightest blessings. Are we done? Is he still around? I don't want to still be streaming. Hold on. Let's make sure we're not still streaming. Because I don't think it stops until he stops it.
Well, I have to get moving.
According to this, it's still supposed to begin in a few minutes. Let's see what our lives do. I should have asked, by the way, we need any techies out there that could possibly help us. And I forgot to ring the bell. Okay, we're off. Okay. Hopefully it's streamed. I'm gonna be heartbroken if we sat here for an hour and just talked to nothing.
All right.
Joseph, thank you so much for humoring this crazy lady.
All right, I will see you later.
All right. Well.
Take care.
So,